I'm so pleased, Joseph, that I have this opportunity. But I would like to tell you about, or maybe you can ask me some questions after. But I lived through a period of savagery, horrific events to the Jewish people. My generation is dying out. And I would like the story of the Holocaust to continue as long as the generations go, not like other historic events that are forgotten. And I wonder if you can tell me how you could establish a kind of a process that will help to continue the Holocaust story. I myself, most of my life story you know, but you know that life in the ghetto was horrific. You know that my parents worked very hard to keep me for as long as possible. And when I left the ghetto in 1942, there were no other children, or perhaps a handful of children that survived the ghetto. And I wonder on two aspects. One, how to teach people, how to prolong the story of the Holocaust, but not only to teach them about the Holocaust, but to make what's called in Hebrew tikkun olam. I would like to have a faculty, like they have to say a faculty of psychology. I would like the universities to have a kind of a special, not special, but a kind of a course that would teach people rather than to analyze them, like psychology does. I would like a kind of a teaching process to make people better, to make them understand that evil cannot succeed, and that all those sufferings that I went through should not be repeated. And I was lucky. I was hidden by a Christian family, but people like who were sent by the Nazis to Auschwitz and suffered brutality that one cannot express in any words. This should be uprooted from kindergarten, and the process should continue through everybody's life to educate people. What do you think about it?
I agree with everything you said. And I think something that's different about my generation compared to your generation and the generation that came after you is I think my generation is quite arrogant to think that we've learned the lessons from the Holocaust and that we've learned the lessons from other genocides. And if you just look at the world around you today, it's quite clear that we haven't learned the lessons from the Holocaust and that
I
agree. Evil does happen in the world, and we're not doing enough for the future generations or just in the world at the moment to stop the evil from spreading and happening. So I think that's great sadness. I think what you need to do is you need to speak to people who have been involved in the hardships involved in the Holocaust like you have been, to really understand how bad the day-to-day life is, because I think that's the other thing that people forget. It's not about it's about the day-to-day life and how hard living on a day-to-day basis was. I remember some of the stories you told me about what you'd have to do to find food or what you'd have to do to cook food. I remember you speaking to me about your mum and how there was no food and how unhappy that made her. And it really is just the living on a day-to-day basis that people really do forget about these events, and that people take for granted nowadays. I know you were very young when the Holocaust happened, and I know you were even younger before it happened. Can you remember much from your childhood before the Holocaust? Can you remember were you a happier child? What was your relationship like with your parents? I read your book and I know how much you valued them, but can you tell me a bit more about it? What was it like at school?
I'll try to explain to you. I try to remember as much back as I can. We were a very large, happy family.
I feel now.
Like we are now. And I loved my grandfather because he had a timber yard, and my cousins and I were, as young children, in Poland you start school at 7, but we went to a kind of a Jewish school, or like a school that Korczak established. It's a mixed school with Christians and Jews. And I had a lovely relations with all the classmates. And I had a very good friend called Basha, who was related to the foreman that my grandfather employed. And we were in each other's houses day and night. But family-wise, we had a great relationship with my mother's brothers and 2 sisters. And my grandfather was always with us on Friday nights, or we were at his place because he had a huge table and more people could come. And the celebrations were beautiful. The table was laid to spilling, you know. Everything was so beautiful, and the silver candles were large and bright. The tablecloth was white, and we ran around the tablecloth. It was such a happy Friday, and sometimes Saturday as well, because not so often, because after Friday night they dispersed my uncles took their children, my aunts also. So it was a smaller group, just us and my grandfather. My father had a lot of friends, both Jewish and non-Jewish. He didn't have a beard, and my grandfather did have a long beard, and he always sat over a desk with a huge, I don't know if it was Gemara or some other Jewish book, but I always sat on his lap, and he curled his beard and touched me, you know. I never forget this feeling. It was so sweet, you know. They didn't call it nastily. It's like joking, you know. Yeah. And why he didn't have a beard? Because he did business with non-Jewish people, and it was easier to be one of the group. And yes, so my childhood was very good, but I mentioned my preschool days, because I was just 5 and 9 months when the war broke out. But I went to the school for some time, and when the war broke out, and I realized something was not just the same in the school. First, people said that I was a dirty Jewess, and I looked at my uniform. It was black with a white collar, and a black dress with white buttons and a white collar. And I looked at it and I said, I'm not dirty, I'm a clean girl. Oh no, you are a dirty Jewess. I started noticing that things are changing.
About how old were you then?
6 and about 4 months.
Okay. And before the war broke out, you didn't notice any anti-Semitism?
Nothing. Everybody was happy and friendly. And
to your parents as well? Or?
Yes. It was... You couldn't feel it so much, but you sensed
that something was
That
wrong?
I'm different. I didn't mention that we lived in a town called Radom.
Which country is that in?
It's Poland.
Okay.
And it's about 90 kilometers south of Warsaw, a very important town because it was connecting other towns and
And it was a big
districts.
town in Poland?
Quite one of the biggish towns. Holidays the family spent in a place called Wyśmierzyce. It's difficult to pronounce it, but I remember it. There was a lovely big country house, and my mother had many close friends, mainly female.
This is in Poland as well?
That's in Poland as well. And I remember running around with other children and spending time in a kind of a pool. It wasn't a swimming pool, but we paddled in it and we played. Those were the happy days. And food was always around, loads of it. And especially for children, there was special sweets. I forgot the name of them, but I still feel the taste of them. And yes, my father was always playing with me whenever he had time, because during the day he was away. My mom was always busy, cooking, talking to friends, and so I was happy because we lived very near the timber yard. I was very happy to just disappear and play with my cousins in the timber yard.
And this is also where you saw your granddad?
Yes, that was my grandfather. And my happiest memory of my grandfather are sitting on his lap. And the way he continued studying the Torah or whatever, Jewish prayer books or Jewish philosophy, or the Talmud. I think the big book was Talmud. And
why else did you get along with your granddad so much? Because he seems like he's your favourite person in your family.
no, I lived nearest to him.
Okay.
And I could always sneak out and go and see him. And not always, but many times. My mom was very good with friends, and everybody loved her, and she was extremely beautiful, really beautiful.
Did both your parents work?
Yes. My mom looked after her uncles, and they were partners in a flour mill. So she was always busy buying for him stuff and selling his flour and some products of I don't know how to call it, but it looked like rice, but I don't know if it was rice. And people used to come to her uncle, and she was his partner manager, you know.
So at this point, it seemed like you were having a very, very happy childhood. Were you getting any inkling of anything that was going on with the war, with Hitler?
As a child, I didn't feel anything until I had the feeling that I was different, and people called me dirty Jewess or dirty Jew, you know.
This was at school?
And that was all in school, I would say, in early 40.
Okay.
Early 40.
So about how old were you at this age?
At this stage, I was 6.
Okay.
I was 6. I felt that I was being targeted with screwed up paper. I felt that rubbers were thrown at me. And in the playground, there were 2 Jewish boys and me in the class. Not in the school, in the class.
Sorry, how big was your class? Was it?
How big?
Yeah.
About 20 children. I don't remember, but about 20. There
Okay.
wasn't. The room was very big, and we were sitting sort of around. It was a kind of a Montessori type of a school that you played and you learned, you know. And in the playground, the boys were targeted. They were sort of chased around and pushed around, but not terribly. It was tolerable. In the early 40s, I can't remember the date, but a few officials came into the class. I can't tell you whether it was 6 or less, something like that. But one of them spoke perfect Polish, everybody understood. Amongst themselves, they spoke German. But the one that spoke Polish, he stood up in front of the class and he said, he said, are there any Jewish children here? And I put my hand up and he said in a rough voice, stand up. Then the boys said that they were Jewish, and the same thing happened to the boys. And they say, go to the back of the class. So we went to the back of the class, and there were seats. So we sat down. No, stand up. You will stand until the end of the lesson.
Remind me, how old were you at this time?
Still 6,
Still
yes.
Still 6-year-old. So,
yeah.
I mean, and you still had an innocent, you didn't know what you had done.
No, I didn't know what I had done and why I had to stand rather than sit like all the others. And then he continued, he said, in the playground, you go, and he pointed out a corner of the courtyard where we would be together, only the Jewish children.
So how did you feel when you were...
I was stunned.
And were you confused?
I wanted to ask, why am I? But you have to do what you are told. And especially in Poland, it was nice, a nice discipline. You didn't row, you listened to your teacher, you concentrated.
So it was like you being told off for something you didn't know what you'd done wrong.
Exactly. It was a feeling that something is going to happen to me, that something I didn't like. So in the playground, we stood in that corner and we talked about why we are segregated, why we can't play with the other children. And I tried to talk to the children, why can't I play with Basha, you know? And she ignored me.
So at that stage, your relationship with her was finished?
Yeah, and not only that, but she ignored me in a sense that I felt she would rather not speak about it. She wasn't rude or told me off, but she didn't want to speak about it. And on that day, Basha changed. Basha was my best friend. And on that day she changed. She started calling me dirty Jew.
And before those officials had come to your school, she
was also a bit different,
okay.
But not as different, not as obvious.
Okay. So there was a gradual change, and then when the officials came,
yes.
Everyone turned on you. And
Sorry?
And when the officials came, everyone changed around the school?
Everybody. But some were also unsure what was happening. But most of the non-Jewish people changed. They distanced themselves. And some were nice, they didn't call names, didn't offend you, but some were hostile.
They were the same age as you. Do you think they knew why they... Do you think they knew what they were doing? Do you think
I don't know, but they felt that they are different to the Jewish people. After the school finished, I told my mom, I walked home by myself. Basha wasn't with me. Usually we walked together.
And not with the other Jews?
And not with the other Jews. So I walked alone. The boys were in another street, so they walked separately. And I came and I told my mother what happened. And she said, "Why do you make up such stories?" And that hurt me so much. I cried and cried. And my mother said, "Don't cry, I'll go tomorrow morning and I'll speak to your teacher. Stop crying, stop crying." She kept on repeating. And I said, "Mommy, it happened. Those people told me not to sit. They told me to stand." She didn't believe me, but she quieted me down. She said, "Okay, okay." And the next morning she walked with me to school, which was very near. She didn't have to, but she walked. And she spoke to the teacher, and the teacher told her it was true. And my mother turned sharply. She took me by my hand, and we walked home. So I didn't stay in the school.
Do you think she did believe you? She just didn't want to believe you? Because
I
she must
think
have been.
she was shocked by how come I was so badly treated. But this was the beginning of being badly treated, because soon after, we lived in the center of Radom in a very nice apartment, and very soon after, I can't tell you exactly, but early in the morning, my mom was still in her dressing gown, and the sharp knocks, I think the flat was shaking. So my father, rather worried, went to the door, and several German in uniform burst in.
Soldiers?
So, yes, military. And one had a gun, a revolver, and he pushed my father, and not us, but we were already by the wall. I mean we, my mom and I, and my mother hugged me in front of her, and she looked at my father looked at her, and the Germans had yellow stickers in the shape of a half a Magen David, another insult. And they kept on putting those stickers on the chairs, the table, the bookshelf, and there was another long table by the wall on that. And then they went to the bedrooms and they put stickers on them, even on the sheets, not sheets, the covers, and everything.
So anything of value?
Anything of value.
And at this point, did you have a better idea what was going on?
No.
With
I had no idea. I was shaking. My mother kept me tight. And at one point, one of them spoke again in Polish, and he said, "Everything that has those stickers on should be left as it is, and you have 24 hours to leave this apartment." We lived so near to the town hall where the German occupied that it was convenient for them to evacuate all people, not just Jews, but Jews had 24 hours to leave the area, and non-Jews 2 weeks.
And this must come out a surprise to you. Germans coming into your house and...
My mother was hysterical, and my father tried to calm her down, and he said, "Look, this is the situation. I'm going to find a place to move." And we moved to another Jewish family that was pre-ghetto, to another Jewish family who allowed us a room with them. When we told them, they were just a shock, when my father told him, but later they discussed it. And listening to this whisper and what's happening and how we will live and what is going on and why do they single us out. But it affected the child's, suddenly you felt you are one of the adults. what are they talking about? I want to know. And they tried to keep me as calm as possible, but I was nervous.
They wanted you to be naive about what was going on.
Exactly.
But you still got something from them. You still
I still
heard them
had
whispering, and
the knowledge, what was happening, that we Jews have to be different from all the others.
okay. So it was only really at this point after school, after this clearing out, that you knew what was going on.
Yes, I had the feeling. I'll show you later an announcement that all Jews have to live in a certain district, a most dilapidated district, and they had to move by a certain date. And when this announcement came out, both on windows, shop windows, and on the radio, everybody was terrified, absolutely terrified, and especially my grandfather. He said, "This is the end, this is the end." He was so upset with it. What are they doing in this? Another incident happened in the street one Friday night before we entered the ghetto, that my grandfather went to the synagogue. Everything was very near the center where we lived. And we waited for him on Friday night. Everything was laid, everybody was sitting, but not the men. The men were coming from the synagogue. And my father came early, he didn't, and two of my uncles came early, but the rest of them didn't, so we waited for them. And there was a knock on the door, my aunt answered the door, and she screamed. She was so... everybody ran to the door. I saw a man standing there, slightly bleeding, and he had cuts. And he tried to calm down. Be quiet, be quiet. And only then I recognized my grandfather's voice. What happened to him? Some thugs cut his beard off with some rough instruments, pushed him around. I think he was beaten as well. And the front of, he didn't have a coat. I remember a white shirt was quite covered with blood. They probably took the coat. I can't remember he wore a coat. And he tried to calm everybody down, sit down, and my aunt brought water and cleaned him up, and he had another, what they call the ghetto, like a white coat. So she wanted to calm,
Sick blood.
Yes, and to calm everybody down, but she cleaned him up, but you could still see the cuts and rough skin, you know.
And when you saw someone you love so much like this,
I cried, and I tried to go near him, and I was, no, not yet, later.
And surely at this point, you always described how close you were with your granddad and how...
It was terrible. It was really, not just for me, for everybody at the table. But he was very brave. He said, "Don't worry, those were thugs." And I lost my beard, he said. I lost my Judaism. I remember him saying, both in Yiddish and in Russian, because he was under the Russian until 1921 or 19. So he spoke Russian and Yiddish mainly. And he said this, it's the end, it's the end. He was, and shortly after this incident, we were shoved into the ghetto with all the population, the Jewish population in particular, very, very worried. After the announcements that all Jews have to move to the ghetto, the word ghetto was to me like something.
You had no understanding what it was.
Never heard of it, and the rush of the people to find a place, to find the family, to be near the family. It was.
What was it like? What was the? So it was an area cut off from the rest of the city.
The area was the old town of Radom, a very old town, mainly industrial. And the Germans made the non-Jews to leave that part of the ghetto. And Radom had 2 ghettos. I don't know why, but they had 2 ghettos. We moved to the nearer one, to where we lived. And I remember the address we lived was Warsaw 6. And my father kept on saying, remember this in case you get lost. And why he thought I will get lost, there was people all around. And everybody shoved and shoved. And my father found a storeroom behind the drapery shop.
Was this close to all your family?
No. It was very small room, very dark, and it had only a door, not a window. To keep some light on, it was April, so the door was always open. End of March or April, 41.
So it wasn't like you were moving into someone else's home, it was just finding wherever you could live?
Wherever you could live, and it was a hovel, really a hovel. But for some weeks the ghetto was open, so you could come and go out of the ghetto, come into the ghetto. And my grandfather's foreman helped us with, because the space was so small, my parents could only bring 1 bed and a bench where I could sit. He made the bench for me from my grandfather's wood.
So at this point you still had contact with Christian
non-Jews,
people? Okay.
Yes, with non-Jews. And he had this idea to elevate the bed so that my parents could keep storage under the bed, and to make sure that where I was allocated to sleep on a bench, during the day we could sit and put the whatever bedding I had on my parents' bed. There was a tiny table, very tiny, and he made, whether he made or he bought, 3 stools for us to sit. My mother kept some groceries under the table, and sometimes I remember kicking the box under.
So if you wanted to eat food, cook, was there anywhere to cook? Was there anywhere to eat? Was there anywhere to go to the toilet?
Hardly any. My
mom have a shower?
No shower. Who talked about shower or washing? Nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
And you lived in the ghetto with, do you know around how many other people there were?
Thousands. Thousands. And everybody was trying for a space my grandfather was not far from us, with 2 uncles, 2 aunts, and 5 cousins in 1 room. It was bigger than ours, and it had windows and the front door, but it was so squashed. I think my uncles didn't sleep at all. I don't know where they slept. I don't know. And the kids slept on the floor, and it was horrible.
I know you said for a period of time you were allowed out of the ghetto, but then what was the turning point? Food was getting more scarce and water was getting scarce?
Yes, everything very quickly changed in the ghetto. Food was very scarce, so everybody wanted to work. Because when the Germans took groups out of the ghetto, when the ghetto was completely closed and food was not delivered. Provisions were impossible to find, and the Germans gave rations, very small ration food ticket, sort of, I don't know what you call them, ration books. And you could not buy anything, and what you got officially was starvation. The ghetto situation became impossible.
What I want to know is, were Jews turning on each other because life was getting progressively harder?
Harder, very hard. My father got a job in the municipal gas works, and he used to try to smuggle in a carrot or a potato or something, but the Germans were Rottweilers, not humans. They checked everybody's legs and body. If they bring in something to the ghetto, they were shot on the spot. So people tried to send out illegally young children to bring something, and it was impossible to leave. One day my mother took me to what was called, I think I told you about it, to the Judenrat, and there were quite a lot of women there, and me.
What was the Judenrat? Do you know why she took you there?
The Judenrat was a kind of a Jewish, supposedly, government in the ghetto.
Okay.
Not a government, but a leading group of Jews that wanted to keep order amongst the Jews.
Like a self-elected thing rather than something...
Sorry?
A self-elected thing, that was...
Not self-elected. The Germans elected them.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Jewish police was involved with this Judenrat. And maybe my mother was, I'm sure she was summoned by the Jewish police to gather there in the Judenrat. But there were other women, quite a few. I don't know, 90, 100, I can't tell you. But my mother took me with me, and she whispered to me, if anyone asks you how old you are, say 14. But I was a child. But for my age, I was quite tall. Nobody asked me. And then they lined this group up in 5. My mother pushed me to be in the middle. And we walked to a place called Rivanska Street, which was out of the ghetto, turning left. That was the street. And when it was a short street, and there was a courtyard, and the door that the police led us to go in.
So after you were marched from the Judenrat, what happened next?
Well, we walked into a big hall, and I saw people were cutting materials, and they took my mother away, and they kept me in this place. And I wanted to go with my mother, and they said, "You will see her later." And
did your mum say anything to you at that point, or?
No, she said, "Be a good girl." She always said that, "Be a good girl." And I didn't see my mother at all, and I was given a broom, and I saw a box in the corner, and I think it was a Jewish policeman said, "Pick up all those little cut-offs and put them in the box and sweep the floor. Make sure you sweep it well." He said it quite civil, but ordering me. So I did it. And afterwards, some of the cuttings, I was taken to another room. Not some, quite a lot, and they were heavy, to another room where women were sewing. It was black material, khaki color, and gray-blue. And I came back, picked up more of this stuff, and Oh yes, there was a big dog, Alsatian dog in there, and this policeman told me, feed him, give him water now, and after you get your bread, give him water then, but don't drink the water. And he said it firmly, don't drink the water, just give it to the dog. And this was my duty. Then came a break, I don't know if it was short or long, and I had a piece of black bread, and not lukewarm brown drink, which was called cicoria. And eat as quickly as you can.
But not much to eat at all.
Nothing with it, nothing. And so the day finished, and I saw my mother coming out, and I joined her, and we walked back to the ghetto. And my mother said, did you get your bread? Did you get your drink? I said, yes. Oh, good, she said, because this is all we had. And then she said, you know what? Let's go there every day. I think she had to go there every day, but she told me, let's go there every day, and don't worry about me. I said, what did you do, Mama? And she said, I was sewing a coat or a jacket, I don't know. And she said, did you bring some material into the sewing area? And I said, yes, but I didn't see you. She said, no, I was in a different room. So I had no contact with my mom. And then I got up the ladder and was sent with some of those garments that were made already to a very steamy room. And people were ironing there. But my main job was to clear the floor from the cuttings.
How long did you do this job for?
I don't know. It must have been months, but I don't know exactly how long. And then one day, there was whispers in the cutting room. And I couldn't hear, I didn't. Then there was a big window which was covered with white paper that was stuck to it. But there was a small gap at the bottom where I could reach to look out on the Aryan side. And one day I was looking out. I think that was the only one time where I was hit from behind. A woman was holding a long stick with a ball, some spikes in it, and she hit me hard. I still have a bump there. And she said, never look out of the window, or what are you doing? And that was my experience in that factory. And when we came out of there, my mother grabbed my hand and she said, what happened to you? I said, why? She said, you have blood on your neck. I said, I was hit by somebody because I was looking out of the window. She said, why did you do that? I said, I don't know, I just wanted to see what goes.
You were a young child who...
Yeah. And when we came out of this, I don't know if it was on this day or some days after, or maybe weeks after, I can't remember this part of. I know that my job was to clear the floor, and my mother said something to my father, and he said, yes, next week or the earliest as possible. And they didn't tell me what. And so it must have been July 1942 when they spoke about it, because it was going to happen imminently. So
what was going to happen imminently?
Well, I didn't know, but my father, later when it was officially arranged, he told me, you must leave us. we have to stay in the ghetto, but there is danger for you, and we have to look after you, so it's danger for us, but we will be united, and you will have to be, every time they repeated, be a good girl, be a good girl. He said, we are going to take you, I'm going to take you to, when it's twilight, and you will live with a non-Jewish family. But you will not stay in Radom, and we will join you later on. I said, why don't you come with me? And I argued with him. Why don't you come with me? I don't want to be on my own. And I will be unhappy and I'll cry. And he said, you have to go. It's for your good and for our safety. And he kept on saying that whilst I'm in the ghetto, it's dangerous for them. I don't know how I survived the ghetto until 1942, because when my father took me to a window and he screwed away some planks of wood and he lifted me up and pushed me, I just managed to get through that space. The room was dark because it was inside, and the Germans made sure that the non-Jews don't look out into the ghetto. The room was very dark, and two hands grabbed me under my shoulder and pulled me in. And my father, I could hear my father putting back the planks and making sure that the wood is secure.
What was your last memory of your parents?
Well, the last goodbye to my mother was, I was sitting on her lap. She wore a black dress with red roses. I was sitting on her lap and she hugged me, and she hugged me tight. And my father said, Genia, it's time to go now. And he took my hand and he pulled me, and my mother was still holding me tight. I began to cry. And I could feel my mother was turning away. Sorry. And my mother was holding me, and my father pulled me to slip away from my mother. And I tried to say, bye, Mom, but she must have been crying, so she turned away, and that was my most horrific experience. I'm glad you asked me this, because it brings my tears back. Out of the ghetto, I slept almost immediately, although it wasn't very late, in a bed. And although I was 7 and a half by that time, I wet my bed out of sheer fear.
Softa, when you woke up after the first night where you said you wet your bed, what did you understand about your situation?
I was in a desperate situation. I was ashamed that I wet my bed, so I stayed in. And the lady that looked after me from the time she took me through the little gap, she sensed that I am in distress. And she said, what's the matter? Do you want to get up now or shall a bit later? She was very kind. And I was a bit, she said, did you wet your bed? She said, I often do it. You know, she felt my pain, my feeling, my fear, my bewilderness. What am I doing? Where am I? What am I?
Did you even know who she was at that point?
I knew her from sight, that she was, I knew her, that she was a friend of the family. I knew that my grandfather's foreman was somehow related to her. And there was another man that was always around them, around the two of them, called Mr. Bombauer. At the time I didn't know what and how, but I found out after the war that those three arranged for my Polish papers and for my safety. There was another man involved. He was a Polish policeman. After this lady, Anina Pigułowska, realized that I wet my bed, and that's why I am so distressed. But I wasn't distressed over I was bewildered. Where are my parents? Why have they left me? Why am I alone? So she said, look, we dress quickly. You don't have to worry about the bed. We dress quickly, and don't be afraid, but a Polish policeman will come to help us get to the station, and we've traveled to Warsaw. To me, Warsaw was like the end of the universe. But I want to stay with my parents, near my parents. She said, they'll come. So somehow I got dressed. I don't remember whether she dressed me or I dressed. And she already had a little suitcase for me to take to Warsaw. I think my father arranged that a bit of my clothing will come with me. But I didn't carry it when he pushed me into that little space. So to be more safe, she put cotton wool around my face with a scarf, tied me up, and to pretend that I have toothache. And she looked all the time through a door, and then she saw that Polish policeman, so she said, let's go. And she was jolly about it. But she said, one step behind us. And if anyone stops you, we don't know you.
Was it quite hard to trust her, considering everyone else you'd come into contact with?
No, she was very kind, and I knew her.
Okay.
But I knew her from sight, not to speak to and she said, call me Ciocia, which means aunt. But she told me to be behind them, so how could I call her Ciocia, All this was so confusing, so unreal. Anyway, we walked, and we came to a siding of the station. We didn't come through the main doors. We came through what they called the signalman. And we got into the platform, and within minutes a train came, and she took my hand, and I sat by the window, she sat next to me, and she was reading something, and I looked out. There were some Germans in that compartment, but they were soldiers, not murderers, not in the black uniform. And on one, she was nervous because she sort of made signals to me not to speak.
Were you scared?
Sorry?
Were you scared, or did you not really know what was happening?
I wasn't scared, but I was uncomfortable. It took some time. We reached Warsaw, and we walked over a bridge. I remember the name, Kierbeja. And we walked through the bridge, and then there was a church called Florentina. And she walked into the church, and she introduced me to the priest, and he sort of blessed me. He opened and blessed me, and they left. She knew him, I didn't know him. But she said, you are welcome to the church whenever you want to come with with your family. She meant her sister and the family. I sort of thought about it. Why did she introduce me to that priest? But later, when I grew up, I thought, so that he knows to be careful with me because I was Jewish. And later I had contact with him. So we walked another few yards and we walked to the flat in Jagiellońska Street, number 32. I noticed that next door to that building was a Jewish sign on, but I didn't look too much. And some weeks later, when I walked freely on the street after school time, I know that this must have been a Jewish either synagogue or shtibel, which is a small synagogue, because there was a sign. And we walked up the stairs and she knocked 3 times, sort of 1, 1, 1, and the door opened and the whole family, what I called my aunt, Zosia, and Leon, her husband, Stefan, her son, Zosia, her daughter, Mira, her daughter, and they all stood around and greeted me really nice, really, really nice, warm, and I can't say any bad thing about how they greeted me to make me very comfortable.
And you felt at home from?
No, I was crying, I want to go back, and she said, okay, I'll take you back tomorrow morning. The sister, Janina Pigua, I take you back tomorrow morning. We sat and there was some food on the table. I don't remember eating it, but there was food. And they were nice, they were asking me questions about my mom, about my dad, about my uncles and family.
Who were the family? Did you know what relation, did they have any relation to your family or?
No, just friends.
Okay.
Just friends. Not the Warsaw family, but Janina that took me to Warsaw.
Okay.
And the other 2 men that were close to her. Maybe they were family, I don't know. But one was the foreman of my grandfather, the helper. And I remember going to bed, but I don't remember how I got into bed or what happened in between. We talked a little bit and I was reassured all the time. Don't worry, everything is all right and all this. And there was food on the table, which was unusual. I was not used to it. I was used to hunger and cold, and this was a warm place with food. I repeat myself, food, food, but that was to me like unbelievable.
Were there, so in the family, was there a daughter your age or?
2 years older, Mira was 2 years older, Stefan was 18, and Zosia was just 20 on the board of 21.
Did you find it weird that there were Christian children who were being nice to you, considering what happened to you at school?
No, they were nice people. They were nice people to which I was used when everything was good. And if my father and mother trusted them, I knew I was all right. But I was crying, I want to go back. I want to go back to Radom. I want to go back. I repeated it, and they were so calming. They said, okay, don't cry. Tomorrow morning I take you back. There are no trains today. I remember her saying it several times. There are no trains anymore back to Radom. And in the morning when I woke up, I looked for her. And I asked her sister, Ciocia Zosia, as I called her, where is Ciocia Janina? And she said, I don't know, she just walked out, but she will come back. And all day I was waiting for her, and they were nice, but the house was empty. Mira went to school, and the other two went to work, and the husband went to work. He was a lecturer.
So you stayed at home alone?
And I stayed with Ciocia Zosia.
Okay.
And Ciocia Zosia took me to the window, and she said, I want to teach you to read. And I said, I can't read. She said, no, I'll teach you to read. And she brought up a children's book with pictures, and she said, try to read one word. I couldn't. And she started showing me the letters, and then she said, how many fingers have you got on your... To take me out of my thoughts, she tried to occupy me all the time, whether with reading or counting my fingers or counting some objects, big things that they were very stiff but very light. And she told me to count. She constantly kept me occupied. When the evening came, what I called Uncle Leon came in, and he said, Genia, I have good news for you. Janina can't, he called her Janina, can't take you to Radom, but I will take you, but I can't get a ticket now. I'll get it. And he invented timing, so you have to count your days, he said. And why did she not take me? Why did she not? Oh, he said, because she wanted to leave quickly, and there was a train. She got on the train. Shortly afterwards, he came home very distressed. I lost my job, I can't go back to work. The Germans told me I am not suitable, and there was a pandemonium. So my thoughts for going back to Radom sort of became unreal, because everybody was distressed that he has no employment, which means he won't have money to buy food or even get a ration card for food, because you had to be self-employed or employed to be officially registered for ration cards.
So what happened to your desire to go back to Radom?
It still was burning hard, but nobody wanted to talk about it. Everybody talked about his loss of job, and Ciocia Zosia, my guardian, said to him, look, you will get another job somewhere else. And he did get a job in the zoo, which was a big blessing, because in the zoo he could grow vegetables in a small, so he used to bring some vegetables home. But all this took time, and I was left there in that situation. And shortly of my stay, they taught me all the prayers for the church and how to cross myself and how to whatever, and to follow their guide. And they also gave me a rosary in pink, in a pink box, and they taught me the prayer for the rosary. So when I was ready, they decided that I should go out more, so that I will not be, that nobody will be surprised to suddenly see me. When I told him, now I know all the Christian prayers, I want to go back, I'll do this in Radom. And she said, no, people will recognize you and they will denounce you. You can't go back to Radom.
Something you thought was going to be a very temporary thing, staying with this family. It turned, yeah. How long did you stay with them in the end?
Well, slowly I became active with the family. The family were in resistance. They did everything possible to do something that is not good for the Germans. The daughter was in with a group of others. They were all arrested, and some of them did not survive, and herself has perished cruelly by the Nazis inside Pawiak, which was a prison inside ghetto Warsaw. Nobody could visit her because it was in the ghetto, and the Poles were not allowed to walk into the ghetto. That was another cruel thing that the Germans did, not just to Jews, but to non-Jews as well. And the father was taken off the street for forced labor in Germany, and so was Stefan, the son. And they both were somewhere in Germany. I know that Stefan was in Stutthof, but I don't know where the father was. He never returned back home. Stefan came home very, very ill. He survived, but he was very, very ill. And he came after I have gone from that family. Myself, I was asked to take butter that was delivered from a relative of my Ciocia Zosia, my guardian, in the shape of a book, and to go with the butter, either with Mira or by myself, on a tram to central Warsaw, to a doctor's surgery. And my guardian made me a top that had a big fold in it, and I delivered the butter. I got money openly, but with the money came some information, whether it was in an envelope or whether it was just a piece of slip paper. And I didn't touch myself, but they put it into my pouch.
So this was your part in the resistance?
This was my part in the resistance. I was whispered, this goes home, this goes to the priest, you know. And on my way back, either I stopped in the church and took out what I was being given, or actually the priest took it out. But he had a kind of a cloak. Sometimes it was in colors, sometimes it was black with some gold or something. And he used to greet me like that, and his coat opened, and then when he greeted me, he took out, or I gave him. And some of the propaganda that I have pictures of, but there were also information about German movements which I couldn't know about, and I couldn't read so quickly on the journey. I couldn't read. From the doctor's surgery, I had to walk and deliver. So I don't know what it was, but by that time I could read a bit. So I came to the back and forth several times, and then slowly there was the ghetto. No, actually the ghetto uprising was before I started my activities. And you could see the Warsaw sky, red, pink, and all colors. And my guardian said, what next, what next? She was... And then a period passed, and there was the Polish uprising. And this was very near the end of the war. But for some reason, the Poles believed that when they rise against the Germans in Warsaw, the Russians will quickly cross the river and come to their aid. But the Russians took their time. It was in August, and the Russians entered Warsaw in January.
What was happening to your family who were participating in the resistance?
No one knew. No one knew. On one occasion, I heard her say to Mira, she didn't think my mother was alive. But I wasn't sure if she meant my mother or somebody, but I think she talked about my mom. I didn't know what happened to my father, or whether he's alive. I didn't know about any of my uncles, any of my aunts. Nobody, whoever you asked, they said, we don't know. So it was in the dark.
So did you ever find out what happened to your family?
I did after the war, but long after the war, and very painful finding out. We took it for granted that they perished. I asked HIAS, it's an American organization that looks after survivors, and they had lists of who survived or whom they are looking for, and they had on the list my mother, my grandfather, my father, my uncles. They had all this from me. They had it on the list. Also, there was another organization which was called The Joint and the Red Cross. They also had the names. And every time they came back, we are looking, but nothing came of it. So...
And this was when you were still in Poland?
When I was still... sorry. When I was still in Poland, I didn't know about those organizations until mid-March 1945. Somebody from Radom told those people from the Joint that there is a Jewish girl in Warsaw, and they pointed out to Janina, who took me to Warsaw. I don't know how they knew. I think that those people were like Mr. Bombawa and my grandfather's foreman. They knew I was in Warsaw, so maybe through that they found out, and they came, and my guardian said, no, she's staying with us. No, and they said, look, let's see what she will agree to. And they talked to me. And because my guardian said no, I said, no, I don't want to go. I want to stay here. But they came almost every day, and each time that they came, they brought provision. You know, things that you couldn't get in Warsaw. Everything was in ruin. My guardian parted objects of her belongings for food, for bread, for anything. Suddenly there was cheese on the table, chocolate on the table, coffee, real coffee, not what there was. And slowly my guardian said, look, they insist that you go with them to Palestine because they think that there you will find relatives, or maybe through there you will find relatives. And then one day they said, bring her to this address. So my guardian took me there, and this was a dilapidated, bombed off area of Warsaw. And I got so frightened in this area. And we walked upstairs that were all shaky and damaged. And she brought me to this office, and they gave her a huge box of provisions. And they said to me, did you make up your mind, would you like to go to Palestine? I'm sure you will be very happy, and if you are not happy, we will bring you back. All you have to say that you want to go. My guardian looked at me, and she said, let her think about it. I'll let you know, or you come and find out. Something like that. I'm not sure how it was arranged, because a few days later they came. And there came 2 men and a woman, and they were really ready to take me. And I kept back and back and back. And my guardian said, if you are sure that you don't want to go, you don't go. But if you are thinking about it, then I advise you to take this opportunity. And you can always come back to me. And we will correspond, and you can always come back. So I agreed. And within an hour, I was ready to go. I didn't have much. Just a bundle and a brown coat that was given to me by my mother.
Were you scared, considering this was your new family in a way, the people you were living with?
This was my new experience, unknown, totally unknown. And on the way back, I was told that there are 3 other girls in the group and 8 boys. And they all want to go to Palestine. I got frightened when I saw one of the boys had a very big tummy, definitely, because hunger can make you swell like that. And he later died, by the way. And we traveled by dusk, because there were still a lot of anti-Semites, and if they sniffed a Jew, a beating was good, but often death. But I didn't know about it. And I noticed that the men had in their socks knives. And I thought for cutting bread or something. But later I realized that they for protection, because they were attacked we were kept safe, the kids were kept safe, but the men was like a shield. And also 2 women, first that came for me, and there was another one. So we walked through the Polish countryside and main roads, and on 2 occasions there was trouble. On one occasion there was a cut, but everybody was fine, nobody said anything. And we crossed the border to Czechoslovakia, and from Czechoslovakia, I don't remember if we had a train, a car, or anything. We came to Hungary. How we came, I don't remember. I know that we crossed the Czech border, and it was safer than in Poland. Then we crossed the border. We walked quite a lot in Czechoslovakia. I remember that. We crossed the border to Hungary. We came to a house where we saw candles, and we realized the town was called Tokaj. And my people that guarded us knocked on the door, and they said we are Jewish, but the door was slammed in our face. And then we came to Romania, and we stayed with nuns and with all kinds of houses. And whilst we were staying in Romania, we got documents, legal documents, to go to Palestine.
At this point, did you even know what Palestine was? Did you know why you were going there?
I know it was a country that the Jews wanted to live in, but I didn't know it was an established country where Jews lived there. This I didn't know. But everybody told me, you will find relatives maybe, you will find Jewish people that will look after you. And then we boarded after a long journey and different places. The nuns were very nice to us, really nice. Other places were just adequate. And then we came to Constantinople, or was this the ship? Constanza was the port, and Transylvania was the name of the ship, or the other way around, I don't know. And we boarded the ship. After 3 days we saw lights, and the people that took us said, now you can be happy because you see the lights of Haifa. And it was midday. We boarded another little boat and we came to the shore of Haifa. The 12 of us were surrounded by the group that took us to Palestine, and we were greeted by people that took pictures and Holocaust survivors, and they told us that they were partisans from Europe. Some of them spoke Polish, which was lovely, but some of them spoke Hebrew, and I was so unhappy. I said, how can I communicate? What will I say? And I was very unhappy with those that spoke Hebrew. And I don't remember pictures being taken, but there were journalists there because somehow they took our names and they were broadcast on the radio. And we were told that we are going to Petah Tikva, to a Meshek Poalot, which is an establishment for people that work, but females.
So you thought you were just going to be working in Palestine?
I didn't think so. And we didn't work there, but the place was called Meshek Poalot. And then a man came. I was on top of a flight of steps, and I heard people calling, Genia, Genia. So I looked at the bottom of the stairs, and there was a man standing. He looked familiar. And then tatuś, which means in Polish, Father. He looked at me. He distanced. He sort of didn't believe it's me, And I ran downstairs, and he started asking me questions whether it's me. Where did you live? And I looked at him. I said, what do you mean where I lived? Where did you live in Radom? So I said, Żeromskiego 21. And he looked at me. Then he said, were you in the ghetto? I said, yes, with you. He said, where did you live in the ghetto? And I had to he really questioned me in this belief that I was his daughter. And in the end, we embraced, we hugged, and I said, where is Mom? And he said, I don't know. Did you find anybody? Did you see anybody? And he said, no, just the two of us. And it took a long time to find out that an uncle of mine survived Auschwitz. And it took a long time, nearly 61, 45. It took a very long time, nearly 40 years, that I found out how my mother died. And the rest of the family perished.
When you initially saw your dad again after all those years, what was it like? Were you over the moon? I know you said he didn't really recognize you at first.
I recognized, at first not, but afterwards I did recognize, maybe by movement, maybe by facial. Yeah, but I was disappointed that he asked me so many questions about our life, which he knew, and I remembered. And after he was satisfied that it was me, he communicated with me. Before he was questioning me, and it hurt me. It hurt me, but we soon became, we talked about how I survived in Warsaw, and how were they nice to me or not nice to me. Was I starving? Was I not starving? All those questions that he went through, he asked me. I missed out one of the parts of my story that for a short time maybe I won't go back to it. But after I had communicated with my father, he took me out. I remember seeing a theater play one evening. The next day he asked me what I want before he was leaving back to Egypt, and where he served in the British Army from 1942 to 1947. And my connection to Britain is through his serves as a soldier in the British Army. That's my connection to Britain. And he asked me what I would like before he leaves for Egypt. And I said I would like a pen because I have to write to my Ciocia Zosia. And he bought me a very nice pen. And he left. And we corresponded from Egypt, but I didn't see him until 1947. In Palestine, I was transferred from that women's workplace to a kibbutz called Gan Shmuel, near a small town called Hedera.
And at this stage you were 12, 10 years old?
No, 11.
11 years old.
Yeah, 11. And in the kibbutz, they greeted us nice. One person that I got very attached to is a guy called Tzvi Cechanowski, who taught us 4 hours a day, and we were told to work 4 hours. I was working with chicks in an incubator and all this. Others were working in the kitchen, in the field, and so on. I was saying that this Tzvi Cechanowski spoke Polish, and I was so happy because I was lost among those Hebrew-speaking people, and I hated it. On many occasions I said I won't go back to my Ciocia. And I insisted on it, and the kibbutz management secretary said, we can't send you back, we don't have the money for it. Do you have any money? I said, no, I don't have any money. So he said, so at the moment we can't send you back. After a period of some months, Tzvi Cechanowski, the one that was teaching us for 4 hours a day, he said, you know to Hebrew, you understand words, just try to speak to me. And he kept on pushing and pushing. And he said, don't be ashamed if you make mistakes. People learn by mistakes and so on. And he was so encouraging. He was such a great teacher. Without experience, he taught us, the whole group. And when I started understanding Hebrew and the life of the kibbutz appealed to me, I was happy with the chicks, I was happy with the food. The food was to me so important. I remember taking slices of bread into my pocket after I was fully fed from the table of the kibbutz. And I never ate it because every time there was a meal waiting, but I was afraid I won't have enough bread. And from that kibbutz, I was 13 and a half. That was 1947.
And what happened next?
I was told that all our group will go to a kibbutz called Gat. Kibbutz Gat was on the border with Egypt, 4 miles away, and it was shelled all the time. And there was one machine gun that there were, what are they called, those dug-in?
Artillery.
Where the soldiers hide from.
Oh, back, like
Yeah.
barracks.
those were, and we ran in those narrow places to deliver gun shells to the people.
Bunkers, yeah, bunkers.
Yeah, and my job was to deliver, and one machine gun that I supplied the bullets, and some others had little revolvers. Maybe there was 2 or 3 guns around, but luckily we survived. And when my father came, that was already 1947, I was still in Kibbutz Gad. My father heard where I was. He came through a minefield. I don't know how he survived it, because people in the kibbutz couldn't believe that he came, and he took me out of the kibbutz. And then I lived with my father in an attic room in Tel Aviv. I studied, I worked, and I was in Jerusalem 2 years in the old university for 2 years. And I also worked, had enough money for a ticket to England. And I asked my father if I could leave. And I forgot to say that in 1952, I was in the army for 2 years until 1954, 54. And from 54 to 56, I was in Jerusalem studying and working. And my father agreed that I should go to England. The reason I wanted to go to England, after my army service, I developed a very bad body rash. All over exposed parts of my body, I was covered in pink, red, horrible, like terrible. And my father took me to several doctors, and creams and pills did not agree. So when I asked to go to England, my father said, yes, the climate will be better for you. So I went. And
so even though you were leaving your father, you had to go. You knew you had to go.
I felt I needed to. I couldn't look at myself. It was so raw. And in the summer, when it's very hot, I still have those spots coming up. And this is my story. And then I had a lovely family and gorgeous grandchildren, and I'm happy.
When did you meet Saba in England?
I met Saba when I was teaching Hebrew to children in West London Synagogue. I was introduced to a very important person called Dr. Reinhardt. He was, at that time, the rabbi in that synagogue. All his energy he put into comforting survivors. His wife was wonderful, and he offered me the job in West London Synagogue. And about 4 months later, your grandfather started teaching there as well. And for 3 years I didn't notice him. But later we became a team. And then I was waiting for each one of you.
And it's happy ever after.
Sorry?
And 26 grandchildren later.
Not 26. Only
Feels
11.
like 26.
Only 11.
Only 11.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely grandchildren. And this is my life. I was told that the book was printed about my town, Radom, with details about the last transport evacuation and the collection of dead bodies from the ghetto to a ditch. And I wanted to read the book because it was written by a Jewish group who had the duty to clear the ghetto. So all the Jews were taken away to concentration camp, and their duty was to clean the ghetto, to go through every dwelling and everywhere in the ghetto. And I read this book from the beginning about Judaism, how it not developed, but was nurtured in Radom, and about good things that happened before the Nazis. Then I came to this page, and I was reading it. It talked about the last evacuation, which happened to be on the 20th of August, 1942. Not one Jew, apart this group that cleared the ghetto, stayed alive in the ghetto. I came to this part, and I didn't know what to expect. I just read it, and then it said about my family, Rappaport. And I was astonished to find out that on the night of the 19th to the 20th of August 1942, just weeks after I left the ghetto, my mother committed suicide with her aunt, with her brother, with his wife, with 2 children, and another aunt who had a boy. They all committed suicide on that night. The lighting in where we lived was gas, and the place of cooking was a pipe which they destroyed so that the gas would come out. And when the children were asleep, I presume, they all committed suicide. I can't tell you. This book was printed in 1961. I don't remember when I read it, but I can't tell you how upset I was, how I felt. I felt sick to my bones, but I was pleased to know that she didn't go that she didn't suffer beatings, hard labor, that she was at peace when she decided to do it. And they did it in the place where we lived. That's my terrible story. But how many years after did I learn about it? Decades.